Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of James Polk, and the focus is baiting war. The year is 1845. Polk now is President of the United States. He has unleashed a bold, aggressive agenda on a number of topics, very much in the Jeffersonian and Jacksonian tradition. And part of what was animating Polk and the American people at the time was a concept called manifest destiny. John O'Sullivan was a journalist who coined that term. And basically what it meant is the Americans felt they had a divine right from sea to shining sea across North America to take their system of governance, their population, their way of life, and blanket not just the east coast of North America, not just the plains, but all the way to the Pacific Ocean, and they had a divine right to do so. This was the concept of manifest destiny, and James Polk's agenda was already addressing some of this. He had completed negotiations with Great Britain over some of the disputed territory in the Northwest in the Oregon country. That had been resolved. He had also secured Texas, bringing it into the Union. This was a handover from his predecessor, John Tyler. Polk finishing that task to bring Texas into the American Union as a new state. But he was just getting started. There was a lot more land on his mind. California, New Mexico, other Western territories, all in the possession of its southern neighbor of Mexico. Relationships with Mexico was not very good right now. First of all, there had been claims by American citizens and businesses against the Mexican government for illegal actions totaling around $5 million that had been languishing in negotiations for years, not going anywhere. Well, things just got worse, though, with the annexation of Texas because the Mexicans flat out cut off diplomatic relations with the United States. They saw that annexation as an act of war. Just as former President Martin Van Buren had predicted, it looked like war was very much a possibility, if not a likelihood, between the two countries. The question is, how would they get there? Could it be avoided? These are the things that were running through the minds of both governments. Now, from a military standpoint, James Polk, as president, was getting ready. He had Zachary Taylor, a brigadier general with the Army right on the Texas border. He sent David Connor on patrol in the Gulf of Mexico and in the Atlantic Ocean with the U.S. Navy, so he was definitely getting ready, but he said he's going to do one more shot at negotiation. He picked a minister out of Louisiana, John Slidell, to go to Mexico City and see if he could achieve James Polk's objectives. Settle all those outstanding disputed debts, secure the border of the southern border of Texas, which was currently in dispute, where that line was going to be drawn, and acquire California, New Mexico, those other western lands. He authorized $25 million, up to $25 million for Slidell to spend on this effort. Central to this conflict was that definition of the southern border of Texas. The Mexicans claimed that their territory went all the way to the Nueces River, which was more north than where the Americans claimed. The Americans in the Texas said that their territory went all the way south to the Rio Grande. In between was an expanse of about 150 miles of disputed territory. And this was part of the challenge. So where did Polk send his troops right now? For now, Taylor was to stay on the U.S. side of the Nueces River, outside of that disputed territory, while everyone waited for Slidell to do his thing. But Taylor had orders from the Secretary of War, William Marcy, that crossing the Rio Grande by the Mexicans with a considerable force will be regarded by the executive here as an invasion of the United States and the commencement of hostilities. An attempt to cross that river with such a force will also be considered in the same light. The Americans, at least internally, were making it clear they believed their territory went all the way to the Rio Grande, and even though they weren't entering that territory yet, they were going to protect it as such. Well, Slidell arrived in Mexico City, and the Mexicans refused to see him. They would not receive him. He was furious. He kept trying 2, 3, 4 times. And over the next couple of months, the Mexicans continued to refuse. By March of 1846, he gave up. He sent a note to the Secretary of State, James Buchanan, that said, "Be assured that nothing is to be done with these people until they shall have been chastised." Again, basically calling for war to put them in their place, which is kind of where James Polk, as president, was leaning as well. He ordered General Taylor now to cross the Nueces. You're not going to receive my minister to negotiate. We're going to be a little bit more provocative. Taylor took 3,500 troops across the Nueces all the way to the Rio Grande into that disputed territory. He was practically daring the Mexicans to cross and start war. Well, the Mexican troops did show up in Matamoros, which is the town directly across from Taylor, right on the Rio Grande. So they're staring at each other across the river, eye to eye. This is now April 11th of 1846. General Pedro de Ampudia ordered Taylor to disperse. Go back to your territory. You're in disputed land. Let the negotiators figure this thing out. Taylor, of course, refused. That was not within the scope of his orders. In the meantime, the Mexican government had fallen. There's some panic in the country. General Mariano Paredes is now in charge, and he frankly took the initiative to prepare his people for an invasion by the Americans. He told his country, April 23, 1846, the defense of Mexican territory, which the troops of the United States are invading, is an urgent necessity. And my responsibility before the nation would be immense if I did not order the repulsive forces, which are acting as enemies, and I have so ordered. From this day, defensive war begins, and every point of our territory which may be invaded or attacked shall be defended by force. Who's the attacker here? Well, clearly depended on who you talk to. Further provocation, though, came from the Americans. As General Taylor decided to blockade the Rio Grande, he effectively cut off the people and the soldiers in Matamoros from all of their supplies, and now is going to become almost a desperate situation for the Mexicans, and they finally took the bait. Mexican General Mariano on the ground took his men across the Rio Grande on April 25th, a few miles from Taylor's camp. Taylor sent Captain Seth Thornton and his 63 dragoons to investigate. They rode into an ambush. 11 Americans were killed, 6 were wounded, the rest were all captured, and the Mexican-American War had unofficially begun. And this was really exactly what James Polk had been hoping for. Now, he had already prepared a war message to go to Congress. He'd been waiting on action to see if something like this to occur, because he had already prepared a message, though, just based on those outstanding debts and the refusal by the Mexicans to receive Minister Slidell. He thought that was enough to go to Congress, seek a declaration of war. But this was so much better as far as he was concerned. On May 9th, he got the word of the attack and the skirmish that occurred on the American side, in his view, on the American side of the Rio Grande. He quickly updated his message and delivered a war message to Congress asking for a declaration of war, boldly stating that after reiterated menaces, Mexico has passed the boundary of the United States, has invaded our territory, and shed American blood upon American soil. As war exists, and notwithstanding all our efforts to avoid it, exists by the acts of Mexico herself, we are called upon by every consideration of duty and patriotism to vindicate with decision and honor the rights and the interests of our country. This statement is highly suspect. All the commentary about on American soil, again, at best, this was disputed territory. The Americans were clearly provocative here in initiating this action, and yet the Mexicans did take the bait. They crossed the Rio Grande. They initiated the military action, and James Polk had exactly what he wanted to get a war message and a war declaration out of Congress. Well, things were pretty high from an enthusiasm standpoint, manifest destiny and all in the United States, particularly in the Congress. Nobody was seeking to really get in the way of the executive at this point. The war declaration passed the House of Representatives pretty easily. There was more debate in the Senate. Things were a little more controversial there, and one Whig senator from the opposition party put it out there. John Clayton said, if the acts of the executive do not amount to acts of war, they are acts which necessarily tend to provoke war and to bring on war. I condemn the conduct of the executive. Well, that sentiment would actually grow, particularly in the Whig Party, over the next couple of years. But for now, nobody wanted to cross the executive at a time where war was commencing. The vote in the Senate for war was 40-2 in favor of war. James Polk had his declaration. The Mexicans had certainly played into the hands of the Americans, now making a war kind of a righteous cause in terms of the rhetoric of the American government. The fighting, of course, well, that was already underway. We'll learn more about that in another episode. That is James Polk and Baiting War from the life of James Polk. For more Presidential Chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles.